Greetings. So as people are arriving into our webinar, I would like to welcome everyone and just take this opportunity to introduce the Every Learner Everywhere Expert Network powered by ISTE. Every Learner Everywhere recently launched the Expert Network powered by ISTE to offer professional learning and coaching for higher ed faculty and leaders to support their students through and beyond the pandemic, including the transition to digital learning. We encourage you to visit the Expert Network website we are posting in the chat for more information and to schedule your complimentary session. So welcome to the Every Learner Everywhere Strategies for Success in Online Teaching and Learning Interactive Conference Series. It is a pleasure to have you with us today. My name is Norma Hollebeck, and I am the manager for network programs and services with Every Learner Everywhere. Before I introduce our speaker, I'd like to take just a few minutes out to tell you about Every Learner Everywhere and the mission of our network. Every Learner Everywhere is a collaboration of 12 higher education organizations with expertise in evaluating, implementing, scaling, measuring efficacy of digital learning and its integration into pedagogical practice. Every Learner Everywhere is one of 3 solution networks sponsored by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. The other 2 networks focus on advising and developmental education. Here at Every Learner, we work with colleges and universities to build capacity among faculty and instructional support staff to improve student outcomes with digital learning. Our mission is to help institutions use new technology to innovate teaching and learning with the ultimate goal of increasing student success, especially for first-generation college students, poverty-impacted students, and students of color. A few quick housekeeping notes. We are recording today's presentation, which we will share after the webinar. Throughout the presentation, we welcome your questions in the Q&A and chat sections. If participants raise their hand during the presentation, however, we will not be able to unmute you. We will be monitoring the Q&A and chat, though, to answer your questions. As a biology professor and recovering associate dean, I am excited about today's discussion, Designing with Equity and Engagement at the Forefront. Our speaker today is Angela Gunder, Chief Academic Officer and Vice President of Learning with Online Learning Consortium. In this role, Angela is responsible for gathering, curating, and leveraging the intellectual capital created by and disseminated through OLC. Prior to her position at the OLC, Angela served as the Director of Instructional Design and Curriculum Development for the Office of Digital Learning, managing and mentoring the team that builds the fully online programs for the University of Arizona. Her over 15-year career as a designer for higher education informs her instructional design practice, where she leverages her expertise in web design usability, visual communication, programming, and standard-based online learning. She's an associate editor for the Teacher Education Board of Merlot and the recipient of the 2018 Merlot Distinguished Service Award, the organization's highest honor. She is also the recipient of 2 Online Learning Consortium Effective Practice Awards for the creation of a framework for personal learning networks and for the creation of exploratory installations of education technology. In 2019, Angela was named an OLC Fellow for her dedication to service, innovation, and scholarship in support of student success in online learning. Her research interests include open educational practices, digital literacies, narrative in online course design, and emerging technology for second language acquisition. She holds a BS in computer science and fine arts from Fordham University, a MED in education technology from Arizona State University. Angela is completing her PhD in teaching, learning, and sociocultural studies at the University of Arizona, where in 2020, she was named an Erasmus Scholar by the College of Education for her commitment to the college, the university, and to the community. Angela, I'm going to hand it over to you as soon as I switch things over here. So I believe you have control now.
There we go. I have the power now. Thank you, Norma, for that warm welcome. Thanks to all of you for being here, for sitting through that long bio. It's sort of like a "this is your life" moment where I got to reflect on all of the amazing people that I've been able to work with over the years. But I'd just like to start out by thanking all of you for being here. And truly on behalf of the Online Learning Consortium, I want to express my thanks to the many individuals who helped to bring together the Strategies for Success in Online Teaching and Learning conference, with special thanks to Every Learner Everywhere for including OLC in this amazing experience. I've reflected quite a bit on how to situate this particular presentation that is ostensibly an encore of a presentation that I gave last year, but do so in a way that would tie together the many concepts that we've collectively been wrestling with in the past year, particularly around the topic of centering quality, but more specifically centering equity and engagement as a pathway to digital transformation. And before entering into any conversations about care and digital learning environments, it's really important to recognize what each of us uniquely brings to a space, and both the challenges and the affordances of our identities within different contexts. So I always like to lead with this situational context and how this affects my work and my lens and how I see the world and how I interpret and make meaning. So my father is Black and my mom is Brazilian and Sicilian. I am a cisgender woman and I was born in the United States to college educated parents. As Norma said, it's been over 15 years. I've kind of been tracking it, that it's now almost 20. I'm at the 19-year mark of how many years I've been a designer. And my work has primarily focused on instructional design in fully online environments for the past decade, including, as Norma referenced, working for the Office of Digital Learning at the University of Arizona. For the OLC in my current role, I serve as the Chief Academic Officer, which is part of our work as a global nonprofit helping educators around the world ensure access to quality online, blended, and digital learning. And then I inform that practice by teaching. I still teach as an instructional designer for the School of Information at the University of Arizona and have been teaching online for about 15 years now. I'm also a student. I love to lead with that as well. I started a PhD journey in 2017, and I'm studying dimensions of power and privilege with open educational practices and more specifically open remix. And I should be done in August, which is huge. And I'm really excited to share what I've been working on with everybody around open practices and how we engage folks. I like to also start with moments of gratitude and with great humility. In this moment, I also honor the original stewards of the ancestral territories of the Salt River Valley, and that the care that the Akimal, Otam, and the Peepash peoples provided for these lands allows me to be here today. I counter all doctrines of discovery that seek to erase the stories, the learnings, the sovereignty of the peoples who originally cared for and continue to care for these lands. And I also affirm that all acknowledgements only bear meaning when they're coupled with respect, with relationship building, reconciliation, and informed action. And I'd just like for us to take a moment for us to all pause to honor original stewards of the respective ancestral lands where each of us sits right now. Thank you. So, as I mentioned earlier, this time together bears weight because of the collective knowledge and experiences present not only in this moment in time with all of us gathered here, but also as continued engagement with the ideas and extensions that we will share in the future. And with this particular recording of this talk that people can go back to with the activities that we're actually going to engage in today, we give life to our ongoing connections together. And as such, I want you to keep this in mind, that all of the contributions that you give are part of a living thing. You can come back to this talk, to this recording, but also you can come back to the activities and participate at any time. And that those contributions that you make give meaning, are given meaning by our collaborations, and that we'll be able to impart this meaning multimodally. So not just text, but that we can include images and links and videos and all sorts of things in digital mediated contexts that respect all contributors. And if anything, if there's one big thing that you can leave with today as a big takeaway, It'll be that this is all meant to be shared, and you can express yourselves and share your rich knowledge and experience with all of your colleagues here today, and beyond that time. So speaking of unique affordances, it would be wasteful for me to not utilize the unique affordances of just an online environment to support this talk as living beyond this moment in time, as being collaborative, as having the potential of being multimodal. So I'm actually asking you to engage in any and hopefully all of the following ways throughout this talk. And you can do this now, or you can do so in the future too. One is to, and this is really bound to now, and it's to ask questions and provide ideas and challenges and extensions generally and as you feel, or generously and as you feel comfortable. You can do so using the chat tool, as many of you have already started to utilize. And I'm going to make sure I don't even have the chat open so that I can kind of peek and keep an eye on what you're saying. But also, if you have specific questions that you want to ask, that you want to make sure that are bubbled up, or also want to or upvote the questions of your colleagues, you can do so using the Q&A tool as well. I would love for you to treat this as collaborative. This is a time for me to share stories as much as it is a time for you to all share stories, reflections, and examples when prompted, and do so in any way that you choose. And last but not least, share any of these materials, including the slide deck, which you'll have access to, the worksheet that I'm providing you, with any of your colleagues to continue the conversation beyond this time. So I'd like to start with a little bit of a moment of authenticity. I'm a big believer in storytelling as a way for us to find meaning and to find new connections. And I had a particularly profound experience back in 2019 that I wanted to share with you that has really informed my practice. So after a work that I had in 2019, I was really fortunate to spend a few days in Tokyo with family and friends. And day in Tokyo, I set off to visit the world's first digital art museum that was created by a group called Team Labs. And I was riding the subway, and on the train ride there, my husband grew pretty ill and he had to leave suddenly. But he said, I'm going to go back to the hotel. I'm going to try to rest and take care of myself. But please, please, please don't skip out on this experience. He really wanted me to go because he knew that it was an immersive experience that I'd been longing to enjoy. And I went sort of reluctantly, having to leave him behind, but nonetheless, mostly as a promise to him in that moment. And I had to pack all of my belongings in a locker that they had before you went into the immersive experience, including my shoes, my wallet, my passport. And I entered into the exhibit completely on my own. And the museum was rather amazing and jarring sort of at the same time. It consisted of different digital experiences in large rooms that were connected by dark hallways and barely illuminated paths. And I was one of very few non-Japanese speakers that were in the space. And moving through the space made me feel ashamed that I hadn't taken the time to not only learn the language better, but really figure out how I might connect with the people around me and navigate that space in a much stronger way. One of the early rooms in the exhibit was called the Soft Black Hole. And what you're seeing here on the screen is actually the room, although imagine this completely full of people that are moving through it, that are lying down and reclining and talking and chatting. And the room required you to traverse a space where the room was ostensibly a 4 foot, I'm doing this as if this is 4 feet, but a 4 foot deep foam mattress. And each step that you took into the mattress displaced the people around you. And if you had no one to lean on like I did, you found yourself really struggling and failing while those around you move forward. And as I was doing this, I had this moment of a lot of emotions, including cognitive dissonance. And I really questioned whether I should have come in the first place. And, at one point I was in the center of the room and I didn't even know how I was going to get out of the room and how I could exit the space and continue either to proceed forward or even to leave. Even months later, I couldn't shake that experience, and it certainly lasted in new ways and come up close to mind in new and fascinating ways. And particularly at the onset of the pandemic, this memory took new meaning. And watching the entire world, our field, but even beyond, collectively enter into foreign spaces with little light to guide the way really haunted me. It stuck with me. I knew that so many of our students, and I know that all of you have seen this too, but also our fellow educators and colleagues alike, were being thrust into new teaching and learning environments without the time, without the resources, without the support, to feel like they had the autonomy and the agency to make it through, or to even get out as they barely moved forward. So I'd like to take a minute to have you all think about your own experiences navigating digital learning environments in new and strange and challenging ways. And if we could just reflect a little bit and write about these experiences in a collaborative document that I've created for us, it'll be a way for us to sort of capture the connections between these sentiments and how they're working for us. So I believe that Joyce is already, yep, she already did put the link in the chat. I'm going to watch as all of you trickle in and join us in the activity. And if you want to scroll down a little bit, in the beginning of the document, I talk about how it works, particularly if you're coming back to this later. There's a table of contents for you to jump around, a little bit of a preface for each of the chapters and talking about the guiding mindsets of this experience. But if you join me on page 5, where it says surfacing isolating elements across digital learning environments, I'd like for you to answer these 2 prompts that I have in the table below. One of them is, how have you specifically felt isolated in the past year, and where in particular have you struggled? And then the second question is, how have your students felt isolated in the past year? Where have they struggled? And I will give us just a couple of minutes to answer these questions. And I want to remind all of you that, this is an open document. So I invite you to share as you feel comfortable. And, you can add your name if you want to, or you can keep your reflection completely anonymous, whichever you prefer. Oh, let me make sure that you all have access to edit. 1 second. I was wondering why I didn't see all those links down there of people jumping in. Okay, everybody should refresh, and you should have full and total permission to write away as you see fit. Oh, I'm seeing you all come in there too. That's great. Excellent. Thank you. And these are the kinds of moments that I love, because we can explore the challenges and the interventions and recoveries that we have to do in real time to make things work. So I did this activity with some folks before. I had some people that left some really deep reflections here, and they didn't feel comfortable putting their names on there, and that's okay. But if you also want to leave your name and and how your feelings connect to the feelings of your colleagues, you can do that. You can even comment on your colleagues' comments too, to say, yes, I felt the same way too, or I haven't seen this in my world, but I want to learn more about it. So just give you a couple minutes to go ahead and write. And I might do a little bit of it myself. I'll add some more rows to this table so we have plenty of room. Also, I love all of you folks that are answering the questions in the opposite order of talking about your students first and yourself second. There's no prescriptive place for where you have to start. This is wonderful. Thank you so much for all of your contributions here. I love the plurality of emotions as well. For all of you that have put in that you didn't really feel isolated, that you didn't really struggle during this time. Please feel free to dig into that a little bit more. I go back and forth and I think about a lot of the ways that I've connected with people more deeply than I ever have in this past year. And even though I haven't been breathing the same air as many folks, places where those connections have been strengthened, where those connections have been amplified in ways that I don't want to lose, as we go into our new normal or our new reality. Also, feel free to, if you're still having trouble with Google Docs, which I think most people are doing okay, You can hit refresh to make sure that you still have access, but you can also leave reflections in the chat too. I'm not prescriptive about where and how you, you contribute. Just a few more moments to finish up your thoughts. And if you need more time, you can always come back to this too. All right. So you can continue to write as I talk to you a little bit about challenges first. So in my position at the OLC, I have worked in service to challenges that have really prevented countless educators and countless learners from around the globe accessing online education equitably. And I'm going to share 3 specific challenges today that my colleagues and I have researched and have been working through, with the spoiler alert to all of you that none of these barriers were new to teaching and learning due to the pandemic specifically. So first, working at a nonprofit with the mission to ensure access to quality online and blended learning in both the US and around the globe reminds me on a daily basis that power and privilege continue to dictate the magnitude of the challenges across different contexts. And we see the systematic failures to address underfunding and lack of infrastructure to support institutions, particularly those serving Black, Latinx, Indigenous, poverty-affected, and first-generation students, and also for students in rural areas and two-year colleges and in career and technical centers of education. We see these failures at both the micro and the macro levels. And, we see this from individual students attempting to persevere through classes using Wi-Fi in the parking lots of universities and restaurants alike, to entire countries, particularly some of the ones that we're working with through the OLC in sub-Saharan Africa and in South America, closing all schools for whole semesters. And I just wanted to highlight a conversation that we had at a recent summit of leaders from prominent historically Black colleges and universities that was held as a part of the OLC's spring conference, OLC Innovate. And there we had Dr. Carl Pettis, who is the provost for Alabama State University, sharing with us that for far too long, the narrative has been that many HBCU responses to securing critical resources and funding are not strong enough. And he called for dedicated efforts to change the narrative if we are to reach our intended goals to impact students in our HBCU communities. And I just wanted to highlight that these false narratives run pervasive for more than just our HBCUs, but for so many of our institutions who have consistently struggled prior to the pandemic, as opposed to these struggles first taking place during the pandemic. In the same way that a translation of language serves as an approximation of the original content, taking the experiences of the face-to-face environment and mapping them into the digital environments one-to-one, it really just creates barriers to access, to understanding, and to connection. And we've seen the world depend on time-specific applications of tools like the one that we're in right now for synchronous online engagement, with Zoom, and that, as you've highlighted as challenges in the document, the activity that I shared with you, this brings up issues of fatigue, of limited access to bandwidth, and feelings of anxiety and exclusion over determining safe and quiet spaces to log in, and to even do simple things that actually provide great challenges for some students, like turning on cameras and microphones. And one of my colleagues, Karen Costa, she calls for centering care and digital learning that gives students choice over when and how they connect. And she uses a food metaphor that I need to come up with like a more internationally acceptable use of this, but she urges educators to think of synchronous time in a course as ketchup and not the hamburger, and working with faculty or instructional designers to kind of situate and figure out how to construct these balances between which of our endeavors, which of our teaching and learning moments actually center care, can start with faculty development, with working with instructional designers directly. Many of you are in these roles where you're doing this work to help people with the building and the facilitating of fully online courses in a way that is comprehensive of all of the challenges and the issues of inequity in terms of offering instruction, but really centering the unique affordances online courses that illuminate the differences between fully online courses and remote instruction, particularly the remote instruction that many of us experience and are experiencing due to the pandemic. And we continue to struggle with in terms of mitigating the spans between both synchronous and asynchronous environments and modes. Most painfully, and even with the myriad free and open resources offering evidence-based practices and professional learning on quality online instruction, many educators and students alike were not afforded the time or the space to align the design and the facilitation of instruction on critical digital pedagogies. And additionally, these interventions were employed as short-term fixes in the hope of returning to a construct of normality, as opposed to serving as catalysts for necessary digital transformation that would protect sustainable access to equitable and inclusive education. And, you know, as I highlighted before, a lot of these challenges that we're addressing right now are things that existed before the pandemic. So for us to even roll back to a time before the pandemic would put us back in this place where, you know, we would not be ensuring the equity and the inclusion of our instruction and aligning it around quality measures that support the student success of all of the learners that are in our classroom and not just a few. So this leads us to our next activity. These barriers that I mentioned before, you know, they're not brand new, they're not unique, but they do tell a broad story of our collective struggle to ensure that teaching and learning is both equitable and centers care. So in this next activity, and if you are on the document still, you can, and look, some of you have already started writing in there, which is fantastic. The activity is to respond to what barriers have you had to mitigate within the digital learning environments that you've been in the past year? And were these barriers ones that existed prior to the pandemic? And once again, you can list as many as you'd like. You can put your name on here, you can leave it anonymous, and I'll give you a few minutes to go through and write. I would also say too, if you have colleagues that have written things that you agree with, rather than just rewriting the same idea, you can write a +1 next to their comment to actually amplify what they've put on there too. And I'll give you just a second to go ahead and write. I sit with that one every day for the person that put in, I struggle to know if I'm effective. You know, even with all of the research and learning and experience I have in these spaces, I'm constantly questioning the efficacy of my actions, the efficacy of my colleagues. I think that imposter phenomenon has even been amplified in some of these moments in time where we've been dealing with seemingly insurmountable challenges. Yeah, navigating the waters of, here it's being coded as academic misconduct, but even looking at what are the assessment practices that we're looking at? Are they equitable? Are they inclusive? Are they centering care? Are they actually centering the unique contributions and the work of our individual students? It's a challenge that our field has had before the pandemic, but the pandemic has brought this right to the front of our attention. Challenges to internet access. I would even say beyond that, the biggest thing that I've learned were all of the assumptions that I had made about what connectivity and bandwidth actually mean for individual students, not just within broad areas or broad classifications of students, but how unique an individual and specific access is and how we have to honor that. Yeah. Focusing on PTSD, chronic pain. As Anonymous Otter is continuing to write, I'm sorry, I'm calling it out. We're doing a lot of work that I'm going to talk about in a bit. Through Every Learner Everywhere, we have a playbook that's coming out about caring for students. And a big part of that is trauma-aware teaching and understanding the unique challenges and the needs that are in front of us in the classroom. Okay, go ahead and continue to write. I'm going to continue to talk through some of the opportunities that we've seen as a way for us to move forward and to address some of these ubiquitous challenges. So once again, I just want to thank you all for your continued generous contributions on the doc. And at this point, I'm really talking about the heart of my talk, which is opportunities for building a culture of care and transformation that centers equity and engagement within all of your teaching and learning contexts. So there are myriad pathways and conduits to building a culture of care and transformation, but I'm going to highlight 3 specific dimensions today that specifically focus on equity and engagement within digital learning environments. And these are all ones that have been particularly impactful in my work and in my collective colleagues' work across the globe. And across each of these dimensions today, I'm going to talk about specific approaches, actions, and resources for centering equity in teaching and learning environments at both those macro and micro levels. But I'm also going to call for all of you to share and continue to share your practices that have been working well for you as well, so that we can continue this community of practice that we're establishing today with this talk. So the three dimensions, as you can see on the screen, are designing for humanized digital learning, designing for learner agency and autonomy, and designing for equitable digital transformation. And I'm going to start to talking about humanized digital learning in particular. So one of my dear colleagues and friends, Dr. Angela Gibson, has recently been connecting her longstanding work that she's been doing in humanist theory and online learning environments to a series of reflections that have surfaced in different convenings in social media. And you can let me know in the chat if you've heard this hashtag before, but have any of you seen hashtag Maslow over Bloom, or hashtag Maslow before Bloom, or even those terms in any way, shape, or form? If you've not heard of them before, what this refers to is psychologist Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs as being critical to secure before learning can begin. So the Bloom here references Benjamin Bloom, who many of us are very familiar with, and his work on three taxonomies, particularly one of the three taxonomies of learning that he created in the 1950s. And the one demonstrated here, his cognitive taxonomy, is probably extremely familiar to many of you, and that it is applied at all levels of education, of instructional design, you name it. It guides a lot of our teaching and learning. And Dr. Gibson, along with countless educators navigating these challenges and barriers that were exacerbated by the pandemic, has been calling for us to consider how our teaching practices cannot run contrary to the needs of our students, and that some of those on the bottom of the Maslow period, those basic pyramid, the basic needs that our students have cannot be unaddressed, or they'll ostensibly prevent each of us from attending to our learning. So when we design digital learning experiences that are humanized, we have to acknowledge two important truths before we can enter into this work. One of them is that when we enter into any learning space, we do not divest ourselves of our identities and of our lived-in experiences. We don't leave that at the door and then engage in our learning. But in particular, in digital learning spaces, we particularly do not divest ourselves from our humanity. So what this looks like in practice is that we have to reflect, design, and facilitate learning experiences that center care and that are equitable in the centering of care. So some impactful practices for me, have been starting with reflecting on curriculum, particularly the cultural responsiveness of teaching and learning, and how you're honoring the unique cultures and lived-in experiences that are present amongst our students. I also encourage you to examine the uses of technology and systems within the digital learning environments that support and center equity. And there are some great tools out there to help you do that. One of them that I really love to highlight is the Peralta Equity Rubric. And this is created for educators to look at implicit bias, at representation, and student support in digitally mediated environments. And then last but not least, this is an oldie but a goodie. I really encourage you to explore the community of inquiry framework and think about it in terms of, in any learning experience that is being created for students, how are you promoting the intentional design of learning spaces that connect cognitive presence with instructor presence and social presence, and how do those three things feed into each other? And with all of these three approaches, as you go and you dig in and you do that reflective work, particularly with the rubric in general, there's a temptation for us to treat tools like rubrics as checklists and think like, okay, we're done with all of these things. But in actuality, what I'm calling to all of us to do as a continuing action is to use these as conversation starters, use these as self-assessment and reflection tools to help continuously improve our practices over time. That's that quality piece, that we're not committing to a one and done type of thing, but we're committing to an ongoing practice and a process of ensuring that we're centering our students, centering care, and centering equity and inclusion in our work, particularly in digital learning environments, which have the ability to promote isolation and exclusion in some pretty harmful and painful ways. So in terms of thinking about how we construct the digital learning spaces that particularly are suited towards supporting learner autonomy and agency, one thing that I keep on coming back to is backwards design. Backwards design, for those of you that are not familiar with it, provides a structure for us to create learning spaces with the end goal in mind. So this was a framework and a theoretical framework, really, that has many applications that were created by Wiggins and McTeague. And it's typically used traditionally to create alignment between learning outcomes, assessment, and content. So kind of starting at the end of like, what are we actually looking for students to achieve? What are we hoping that they understand at the end of this experience? And then making sure that, as my colleague, Dr. Carl Moore says, that we're helping them to build muscles along the way. So our assessments give us guidance into what they have learned, so that we can be sure that they've mastered the topics that we have there, but that the content actually helps them build those muscles, build the strength to get through those assessments with the level of rigor that we expect. So here I invite you to consider backwards design also as a way for us to ensure that equity is centered in the entire process. And I'd like for you to take a moment to consider in your own teaching and learning practice how the design process has changed if you determine that one of those end goals, one of those outcomes is that students can choose when and how they interact with their course content, their instructor, and each other. And what happens if you have equitable access as a goal? What does that mean for the learning design moving to a place where students can engage independent of a specific modality? And that's what we talk about when we talk about development of blended learning, of high flex, and of hybrid learning, creating learning environments that are lasting and can be sustained over time, and that allow people to navigate those learning environments, both students and educators alike, with autonomy and agency over their process. So lastly, I want to invite you into a little bit of my work. A lot of it is tied to my research, which is on open remix. And I'd like for you to consider what it means to remix your own teaching and learning practices to center learning autonomy and agency, and 2 actionable and practical processes that you can put into place right now. I'm going to share with you that have been incredibly compelling for me, and have really changed the way that I think about not only the experiences that I build for my own students when I'm teaching, but also how I design and how I work with institutions and school systems to rethink how we can center care and center engagement and equity. So one in particular you might have heard about in past talks or even on the internet, on the web, is the idea of making syllabi open. And particularly making syllabi annotatable such that, you know, the conversation about rules and policies become a way for building community, for me and my students to make meaning collectively, and to determine which practices will best support students uniquely. And you may have heard people referring to this as an interactive syllabus, or one of my colleagues and friends, Dr. Michelle Pacansky-Brock, refers to this as a liquid syllabus, and it really serves to turn what can be a really strict and exclusionary didactic into a supportive conversation. During the pandemic in particular, I had a lot of students that leaned into that they had a lot of anxiety that they were bringing into the classroom, that they didn't know that it was a safe space for them to talk to their colleagues or their fellow students, or even to find ways to talk to me directly and privately about concerns that they had about their basic needs and securities. And me having a basic security statement in my syllabus, and even having diversity, equity, and inclusion statements in my syllabi, allowed them a level of comfort to open into a dialogue about how they could best feel comfortable and ready to engage in the rigors of the content and of the curriculum that I was presenting them with. The second thing that I wanted to share is a topic that several of my colleagues and I have explored, and that's the theory of rooting digital course design around the notion of the student as an epic hero. We've created a series of course mapping tools, games, and other resources that really push against the notion that the faculty is the one that actually pulls the student along the path to an intended outcome, and that the student doesn't have control and agency over their work. By the way, I have my side eye on the chat, and I can show you my own syllabus of basic security statements. And a lot of those came from the work of Dr. Sarah Goldrick-Rab, whom I can share you some of her work too as exemplars after we're done with this talk. So thank you for highlighting that. So talking about this notion of the student as an epic hero, we've created a lot of tools that allow faculty to map to the online environment this idea of constructivist, student-centered learning in any modality. And some of it involves illuminating what our own roles are in teaching and learning. Like, are we actually the wise elder that is helping a hero on a journey, or are we actually a threshold guardian that is preventing the student from progressing, or even a villain or an anti-hero in these narratives? And the reflections that we guide people through different frameworks and course design tools actually help to get to some of these truths in ways that really can help center the agency and the autonomy of students. So we have our next activity, and here I don't want to purport that I am the only expert of different ways that we can help to support our students in the classroom. And while I have you write, I'll pull up some of those resources about basic security statements that I'll share with you in the document. But go ahead and join me. Now we're in the opportunities section, which is at the top, the kind of the middle of page 11. Please feel free to share with me impactful practices that have really helped to make the learning environment more equitable, or also more specifically in this time of a lot of isolation and inclusion. How have you centered engagement and equity in your own work, either designing courses, supporting faculty teaching courses, teaching those courses yourselves, or even as administrators who are supporting the teaching and learning practices through departments or even at institutions more widely? Okay, just peek over. I just dropped that link in for all of you to see those examples. And I'll be sure on the bottom of this document, I have a bunch of different resources. I will link a couple of the syllabi that I've used both for my undergraduates and graduates. I changed the tone for each of them because they come in with different understandings of what the classroom can be and how they participate in it. Add some more rows to the table. Also want to be mindful of time because we have a little more to go here. Okay. So while you're continuing to write, I'm going to talk a little bit about digital transformation now, which is the third dimension. We've talked about centering care at the course level, but looking more broadly, what are the practices that can really help to guide us to creating sustainable and lasting digital transformation that we're actually ensuring equity across space and time, not just reactively and in a moment, but much more broadly. And if you look around at definitions of digital transformation, many of them come from the corporate sector and they focus on the implementation of instructional technology. And I love this socio-cultural framing by Lankshire and Nobel, which invites us to broaden our perspective to the innovation and to the creativity that are fueled by leveraging the unique affordances of digital tools and spaces. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the work that has been hallmarked to me, to the OLC, and to Every Learner Everywhere that has manifested itself in 4 specific areas, which I'm going to talk about now. So one is professional learning. And My colleagues and I have created support and capacity for professional learning that has included free workshops, webinars, summits, even things like this that we're doing right now, as well as publications for a wide variety of contexts. And from some of the work that we're doing in the Philippines and Ghana on determining direct pathways to digital transformation, to the release of the faculty online playbook earlier last year from the Every Learner Everywhere network at the onset of the pandemic, to new playbooks, new research studies that are coming out consistently from Every Learner Everywhere. We're really trying to dispel this myth that support and resources are only available to some and not to all. Additionally, we're all engaging in critical research on the infrastructural inequities and barriers, working with all different types of groups. And this has included direct work with ministries of education in the Middle East on the state of online learning in the MENAS region that we're doing through the OLC. We're working really closely with WCET on how we can provide more holistic care around often poorly supported positions of adjuncts and lecturers, and even in some areas, graduate students. And then I'm really proud of some of the work that is coming out of the Data Research Center that we're helping to support with Every Learner Everywhere, that's led by Dr. Tanya Justin, on organizational leadership models and gaps in structure and process for supporting the alignment of digital and institutional strategy. And a lot of these reports are going to be coming up in the coming years. So I'll continue to make sure that this document is updated, but you should also, if you're not doing so already, keep in touch with Every Learner Everywhere on all things, because you'll see these as they come out. The third is just the work that we're doing amplifying narratives of resilience from the various communities who have pushed back on endemic issues of inequity and oppression. And I did share the example about the summit that we held at OLC Innovate. That summit actually was part of the release of a publication of a report from HBCU leaders with their calls to action for digital transformation of HBCUs. And I include that link at the bottom of the worksheet that I've shared. And then lastly, we have been really working hard to create space for critical and respectful dialogue within and across communities, where we can explore different challenges to not only equitable digital transformation, but also aligning our actions to impactful opportunities. So of note, Every Learner Everywhere sponsored the OLC's work in holding basically it was a discussion series, salon, unconference, if you will, and it gathered educators seeking to learn more about, discuss, and work towards ensuring more equitable digital learning spaces. And the event was called OLC Ideate, but it's actually a living thing as well. It's an open space that you can join now, so you can go back and watch the talks that were held live in a Canvas course that you have full access to. But in addition to that, a task force has formed as part of that project, and you have the ability to join that task force either as a short-term volunteer, or as even a more dedicated role, leaning in and helping there with the work that is to come. And we're planning on holding a second convening that is going to be coming up again in May, which we highly encourage you to be a part of. But that's been really a great space, and one of those things that we would not have been able to do had we not been a part of the Every Learner Everywhere network to make all of that possible. So before I conclude, I just wanted to leave just a few more resources, all of which are either linked already on the collaborative worksheet, or some of them that you have mentioned in the chat that you'd like to see. I'm going to go back and link them. But one is that our work with Every Learner Everywhere is supported by so many of their open resources and their shared initiatives. And in addition to their 8 equity principles, offering just a beautiful framing for inclusion in digital learning environments, if you've not had a chance to explore their free library of resources in their database, Solve, I highly recommend that you do that. There are many OLC resources that are in there that we continue to use and share. But also, if you want help with sort of contextualizing these 8 equity principles, your own work, resources that are out there, how to actually apply them, there's some amazing free coaching and mentoring that's available through their experts network right now. It's completely free to you. And I believe we're going to talk a little bit more about it at the very end after I finish chatting with you all. So that's one place I'd highly recommend that you take a look and learn more. I also, again, I just really want to encourage you to to explore those references that were in that OLC Ideate Canvas course. Joyce put up the link to that already, that you can get to that open access portal, because a lot of the people that I've referenced today gave deeper talks on some of these topics that I covered today. So like if you want to hear Dr. Angela Gibson talking about Maslow before Bloom and how we apply that, there's a great talk with her. And a lot of our other digital learning experts that are part of the experts network. They have great insight into practical applications of all of these pieces. So the last thing I was going to leave was, which was an activity that we were going to do live, but I'm going to leave that as homework, to talk a little bit about our aspirations for the future, with an invitation for you to share yours. So on that document, you don't have to do this now in terms of your aspirations and your commitments, but I want you to think, maybe reflect, watch back some of these pieces, look at the chat and other ideas that people have shared, and you can come back to this. But right now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to speed us through. I want to go back to where we started in Tokyo with my story about the Digital Arts Museum. So though I was discouraged and lonely initially, I did make it through the one room that limited my mobility and made me question myself. It felt a lot like some of the things that you were all writing in the beginning when I had you share how you felt isolated and struggled. I learned a lot more about what I could do, and I learned a lot more about what was possible. And in that particular moment, it was through the generosity of strangers and through nonverbal communication. I realized a couple of things. One was that I was not alone in that moment, and that I could call on others to help me, even though I felt ashamed that I didn't have linguistic ability in that moment. I did end up, with that nonverbal communication, making some fast friends, and it helped me out. But more importantly, that I was stronger than I'd felt in that moment. And through room after room in the Digital Art Museum, I felt that these feelings growing stronger, and they took me to a seemingly blocked room, which you can kind of see the slide in front of you in this moment, of a room that seemed like you couldn't get through it at all. It was just filled with these giant plastic orbs, and this was my only that was my only view to get through. So at first I said, okay, I think the trick here is that I have to try to push my way through. And as I was pushing, I realized that each push that I made was met with resistance by others doing the same, and all of us were sort of rendered stuck, that we couldn't actually get through and clear a path forward. But it was then when I discovered that if I quickly connected with those around me and I helped them to clear their path, that my own path would be clear before me as well, that we were walking through together, and that we were making the path by walking through together. And I actually made it to the exit in this way, but I really relished that time and the work making new connections and new paths, that I turned around and I stayed in the room longer just to explore and to help others out. And reflecting on that, it's really where I found my work. And I found so many of my colleagues in this space as well, that I really rather stay and commit to creating space for the agency and the autonomy of all of our learners that is distributed in an equitable way, rather than just leave those opportunities behind because I managed to make it out myself. So with that, I leave you with that call of action. I humbly thank all of you. I give you hard hands for sharing a bit of your own journey generously and with a lot of courage and care, and know that I honor each of your unique paths that you all continue to make by walking. So thank you so much. And I will put my email in the chat. This is an ongoing conversation for us, and I hope to continue to connect with all of you and learn from you as we move forward to better support our students. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Angela. This was so wonderful, and the interactivity just phenomenal. I hope that our participants today will find the time to go back in and continue filling in the living document that you've created for us.
Absolutely, yeah.
This is just, it's going to be wonderful. I'm anxious to look back at it in about 4 to 6 weeks and see what it looks like. So with that, I'm going to Thank everybody, not only Angela for her time, and I know her time is precious for her to give it to us today, but even our participants. I know for some of you, this is Good Friday and you may have had the day off and you took some time out to do this webinar with us. Others, there's other things going on in your life, and I understand that Friday afternoons are kind of hectic, but I'm really hoping that you got everything out of it that you were hoping to get out of it, and we'll continue to build on the document that we've got for you. So thanks again, Angela. We do ask that our audience take a few minutes to complete our survey for today's presentation. There's a link going to be put in the chat for you. If you've got something else to do immediately after this, don't worry, we'll send the link to the survey with you in the recording email that you'll get come Monday. And as a quick reminder, as Angela said, visit our Every Learner Everywhere website, our resources page, our expert network page. Try to set up a session for one of those complimentary coaching sessions. We'd love to see you in those. Our experts would love to talk to you. And thank you for attending today's webinar. We look forward to seeing you next week for our webinar on success for all teaching strategies. So have a wonderful day. Thank you very much.